Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, of course, we are doing Lies, which is a bonus part of the Brothers Gracchi series. We, of course, already did parts 1 through 6, so go check those out if you haven't already. Extra history. This is an interesting video. I guess this is basically filling in the gaps, filling in things that may have not been 100% true. I'm not sure. Interesting. I've never done a video like this. It's like an epilogue, more or less. So let's do it. Jump right in with me. Let's go.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the part of the show where I talk about the flags we screwed up and the wall poles we missed. But first, I want to start off today by giving another shout out to our special guest, Mike Duncan. His podcasts on the history of Rome and revolutions really set the standard for history podcasts. They're incredible. Go listen to them. It was an honor to have him on the show, and it was just amazing getting
I like his background props.
Do an episode. And in fact, Mike caught some of our lies. When we were talking about the script, he mentioned that I was playing a bit fast and loose with the tribunary veto in episode 2. And he's absolutely right. I had planned to talk about it here, but I just couldn't find time in the episode to fully explain the thing because the ancient Roman veto didn't work like our modern veto. It wasn't done after a bill was passed, but rather the tribune would veto the bill just getting read. And thus, if it's never read...
I mean, I think I got that, though, reading it. They basically put their hand over the guy's mouth at one point, basically showcasing that the idea itself is being vetoed before it's even expressed, because maybe once the idea circulates, it's a very much of a class. It feels like it comes from a classist society where the senators, the government are more valuable than the people itself. So it gives the rationale of these ideas should not meander into the public, or that then could cause problems. I see it that way.
It can never be voted on. And so in episode 2, when I said that Tiberius got his bill passed and then it got vetoed, total lie. The bill was going to pass, everyone knew it was going to pass, and so when it came up for a vote, it was vetoed before it could even be read.
Okay.
But here, Mike actually provided me with a succinct explanation that was the explanation I couldn't manage. So here's Mike's much better explanation of basically everything that happened in that episode. All right. So, 1, Tiberius floats a soft version of the Lex Agraria, hopefully mollifying senatorial opposition. 2, during the subsequent weeks of debate, it becomes clear that opposition is not mollified, so he withdraws the original bill and introduces a much harsher version. When the vote comes, number 3, when the vote day comes, Octavius vetoes the reading of the bill, and so the vote can't proceed.
Wow.
4, over the next week or so, Tiberius pressures Octavius to drop the veto by halting all other legislation and closing the Temple of Saturn, and that sort of thing. And then 5, Octavius remains unmoved, and so at the next assembly, Tiberius moves to depose Octavius.
We saw that.
Then 6, Octavius is deposed, which follows with 7. The bill is read, the vote proceeds, the Lex Agraria becomes law, and then everything else happens.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's the much clearer summary of the order that things should be in. But the other thing that Mike pointed out, in episode 4, Populus Liena, we talked about as being a praetor. He was actually a consul. Now, I would have never caught this one because I was pulling from Plutarch here, and he says, of these laws, one had the direct effect of branding with infamy Marcus Octavius, who had been deposed from the tribunate by Tiberius, and by the other, Popilius was affected, for as praetor he had banished the friends of Tiberius.
Well, that's a past tense version of that last sentence.
So Plutarch's calling this guy a praetor. But as Mike pointed out, he pointed me to the Fasti Capitolioni, which is basically the stone they dug up about 500 years ago that had the names and dates of the offices for major Roman political figures on it. And sure enough, Popilius is listed as consul then, which is much more correct, most likely. And segues nicely into me talking about Plutarch, because Mike suggested that he might simply be being a little loose with his terminology, using praetor as a general term for official, in the way that we sometimes use the word czar here in the US for people who are in no way czars, or that he could just be wrong. And here's the thing. Plutarch is our major source for these guys. It's something that about every later historian for the period mentions at some point or other, because Plutarch's an interesting case. Personally, I love Plutarch. I think he's fantastic.
You guys love Plutarch?
He certainly has an influence on how I approach history. But if you're unfamiliar with Plutarch, he's the kind of guy who really introduced, or at least popularized, the concept of the biography. And in his most well-known work, Parallel Lives, what he'd do is he'd side by side two Greeks or Romans to either contrast their lives or show how minor differences just made huge effects. But what Plutarch cared about was the utility of history. He wanted his audience not to just memorize some facts or dates, but by seeing the lives of two incredible people put side by side, he wanted to force them to think about their own lives and the world they lived in, and hopefully take from history something that would serve them in that world and in their modern day. Now, I completely love this approach, but it does mean that there are times when Plutarch is a little less of a stickler for details than some of the other ancient historians. He's concerned in honing the big picture and refining how he tells that big picture to his audience, so his audience sees how it's relevant to them today. And sometimes, on some of the small stuff, he's just, let's say, relaxed. Which is totally fine.
That's fair.
It's great when he's not the only source. But when he is, well, sometimes you get things like this. And also armor. It was the run-up to PAX. I didn't even get to see these videos before they went live. And then, like some of you guys, when I saw them, I had that same, wait, doesn't that kit come around a bit later? I had that moment too. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. But there were no flags, so, what can you do? But enough lies. I actually wanted to talk about this series because the parallels with the modern day seem unavoidable. Interestingly, I kept seeing people in the comments liking the Gracchis to one or the other of the candidates for President of the United States. The funny thing was, I saw arguments for basically all configurations of this Gracchi equals this candidate, usually a bit influenced by who the commentator supported. But though it's really interesting to draw those sort of direct parallels between people in the ancient world and people influencing our world today.
Very different world we live in, very different sentiments, very different precedents created, very different systems, economies.
That wasn't really what struck me when I was writing this. What struck me were the sort of sweeping actions that so clearly undercut democracy that we sort of see happening now as well.
Yeah, especially through like executive actions. Now there's a lot of recency bias with people who look at today's time and they say, oh, that's going against democracy. It just depends how you look at it. First off, is it meant to be democratic? A lot of people forget that step. A lot of things aren't meant to be democratic. They're meant to be more of a system of processes, and it can be utilized through the mouth of democracy. Like people are elected via democracy, and then the systems and processes then occur after the fact. So I guess there's a root of democracy, but there's different levels of government. There's different prerogatives of each particular official. But I mean, for example, in the United States, we just look at the United States Constitution when we understand it's something bypassing democracy. And in light, it's always a until proven guilty, you're innocent in this country. So that's one thing a lot of people also forget. And I know we're going on a crazy tangent, but he brought it up, so I'm gonna kind of like situate it. So like, first off, like I said, there's got to be checks and balances. There are checks and balances, and if there's something that's quote unquote unconstitutional, well, there's checks and balances to rein in that. And that is the democratic beauty of, for example, the United States. We are able to kind of like look through the lens of the Constitution and through the judiciary branch to see if something is merited unconstitutional or versus constitutional. And that's always described as our checks and balances when it comes to the executive branch, for example, or other branches that could violate the Constitution on maybe a gubernatorial level or something like that. But nevertheless, I think that is wildly overstimulated when we do a comparison, the parallels between ancient times and modern times, because our morality has, in some ways, leveled out, in other ways not. But on a basis, we're like, just like our life expectancy has increased, our moral bounds have slightly increased, slightly.
Because democracy depends on people believing that at the end of the day, that whatever the vote says, we do. There may be all sorts of attempts to influence the vote. There may even be major efforts to skew the math, right? But when their candidate loses, in a democracy, people grumble about it and then they move on thinking, oh, we'll get him next year. And they think that because they believe in democracy. They believe they have a voice, and that even when shenanigans are going on, that if enough people speak out, there's a chance for a change. And but then when you have politicians, the very people who are most embedded in this process, calling votes illegitimate, what recourse do people have but to tear the whole system down? If the vote doesn't work, what is left of democracy? And while we usually think of the people who believe the election was stolen away from them or their candidate as having a grievance, when you start to call elections illegitimate, all those people who did honestly and sincerely vote for that candidate are either left feeling anger that you're negating their vote by saying, oh, well, it was just stolen away, or passively start to say, well, good, the system's broken. I'm not going to fight for democracy because you just told me that the system is rigged to make me get my way. And how do you have a democracy survive that, right?
You don't.
And then within this episode, we saw the populist demagoguery. And I'm a populari, right? I'm all for the will of the people. Mm-hmm. But I also know there's a reason we have politicians. In our day-to-day lives, we just don't have the time to be experts on every little subclause of every...
Well, that's not just the reason of voting us. I don't want to step on his feet here. He's got a little bit more of this section. But mainly in terms of populares and popularity and the populace or the will of the people. For example, this is definitely a parallel. I mean, I'm not going to speak anything else but the United States here because that's where I live, but it's obviously the parallel he's driving here. But in terms of like the continuous parallel between Rome and the United States, it's very easy to see that there are, I'm losing my train of thought. Let me back up.
In our day-to-day lives,
yeah, I mean, we have checks and balances that can coalesce against the mob rule. The mob rule is very much a frictionless idea of continuing on a path towards the will of the people. Most of the time, that is rooted in very much knee-jerk reactions to things that may occur, whether it be actions, events, or just like, you know, like what is it, like a feather on the camel's back type thing, where, or is it straw on the camel's back, where you drop one last, like, something that's been boiling at tensions, and maybe like one little minuscule thing happens, but it's just because the angle of how that thing happens, things just create a propulsion of everything underneath that then rises to the surface, which becomes the ultimate problem. But you know, we have checks and balances to check in on that, and if the will of the people creates a democratic use of it, then it can be, you know, whatever it is can either be thwarted, or it can be put into the Constitution, or it can be looked at deeper and ruled in the judiciary branch to be quote unquote constitutional or unconstitutional. So it can either be allowed within the confines of the Constitution or it can be amended to meet that standard. But the will of the people surrounds representatives that surround, regionals, which is the state, which is the Senate, which is gubernatorial, which is all like wrapped into the will of the people, depending on the districts, and that's where there might be some nitpicking on like the will of the people when we look at gerrymandering or other things. And we're going way off topic here. So modern politics is quite interesting. Let's jump right back in. This is getting off the rails. If you're still with me, thank you.
But I also know there's a reason we have politicians. In our day-to-day lives, we just don't have the time to be experts on every little subclause of every bill or on the
And we shouldn't have to be.
Byzantine workings of foreign affairs. So we elect people who are supposed to be just that. They're supposed to be experts who have said, I'll devote my life to this, to studying and understanding it, so you don't have to. And as such, their job in some ways is to keep us from our worst foibles, from our shortest term thinking, from our most misguided and ill-informed actions. And if we really think they're wrong, I mean, then we go vote them out of office in the next election. But that's the role they're supposed to play. And as we saw here, when they no longer do that, when they no longer serve as experts, when this is just no longer the case, when the tail starts to wag the dog and politicians no longer serve the interests of the country, but rather are so caught up in beating one another that they lose sight of what they're sworn to do, when they start to compete to see who can appease the mob the most, so the fickle desires of the mob ends up just moving the ponderous engine of state by itself, then everything collapses.
Yeah, the problem of this framework is, there is no problem with this framework. I love the framework that he's putting out there. The issue is like 75% of most elections are that way. 80% or 9, it might even be higher. I'm not going to percentile it, but most people are going to mudsling. Most people there's levels to mudslinging at the same time, but at the end of the day, it is concentrated. The election cycles are concentrated too much in putting the other person down and the other party down versus a continuous unification utilizing one party's objectives as the focal point of why we will be better off versus the continuous negative outlook on why the opponents would be. So it's utilizing fear tactics versus utilizing growth tactics. Carrot on the stick works a lot better than, telling people they're going to die or something like that. Even though it is not FOMO, it is fear mongering. Once again, we're off topic.
Because democracy is built with checks against itself. We all know the dangers of democracy. But if the history of the late Roman Republic teaches us anything, it's that a nation can look like a democracy, still carry the trappings of democracy, while spiraling into anarchy. And how do you pull out of that tailspin? Once you start offering the mob whatever it wants, how do you ever stop doing so and maintain a democracy?
Yeah, the Republic, though, they didn't have checks. They didn't check against themselves. There were several times where people of certain immunities carried out atrocities and they weren't checked against themselves. It happens to this day too. Like, there's an underlying immunity to positions and levels of positions given their position, and a lot of people don't even know it, but most people have a feeling about it. But that's why I disagree with the premise of like people should not, we don't have to be informed in every other issue. Well, you'll never be able to check against if you don't know. So, you'll have a hunch, but it'll be a hunch irritated in emotion and not ratified in logic. So when you look at an issue, maybe it's an overseas issue, maybe it's a domestic issue, you have to have rooted knowledge to be able to make the case to take someone out of office. You have to. Otherwise, you're just rooted in emotion and headline reading, and you're not in more advanced society. The more advanced societies are the people that are working together and having context of the situation, having context of the issues. You have to have the context of the issues. If you don't have the context of the issues, you're kind of wasting your time.
It's a question I think this period of history asks, but tragically doesn't answer. And then there's the partisanship. Rome had been bitterly partisan in the past, but always with the caveat that both sides were working for the betterment of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
They just vehemently disagreed on how to go about it. And yeah, there were egos and desires of power in there, but if around all that, you still have the same goal, compromise is possible. And here's where that breaks down. Here's where compromise ceases to be possible. And without compromise, how can you ever have that democratic system? And then there's the introduction of violence into politics. Roman politics had never been the nicest place, but here's where violence, or the threat of violence, becomes a political tool. And there's just no way that democracy can live through that. If we ever cover the following century, we'll see just how this plays out. But coercion not only destroys democracy, but it actually makes the coercers slaves to the very mob that serve as their muscle, leading again into that spiral that we have no answer for. But all right, I've talked long enough about this. Let's get some anecdotes before I wrap up. Remember Gaius Mancinius, the cowardly general from episode 1? Remember how Scipio...
I think so. Was he in Iberia?
Saved everybody else from the hostility of the Senate, but they basically left him to fry. Well, the Senate essentially decreed that he be turned over to the Numantians, naked and in chains. But when they hauled him all the way out there and presented him at the city gates, turned out the Numantians didn't want him either. And in episode 2, when they're stripping Octavius of his tribunate, this whole scene is extra tragic because he and Tiberius had once been friends. And I think that even more than the fear of losing is why Tiberius keeps pausing and offering him a way out, sort of a way to leave with dignity. Or if you're cynical, you can think about it as Tiberius not wanting to overthrow another major precedent in front of everybody. But and in some ways, though, it's a testament to Octavius' character that he won't take it, even after the cause is lost. And since we're here, I should talk about Roman voting. I know a lot of you guys know this, but when they called out the centuries, the divisions by which the Romans voted, they basically voted in order of wealth.
Yep.
And as soon as one side had over 50% of the possible votes,
they stopped their voting.
Voting just stopped.
Yeah.
This meant that the lowest class never actually got to vote, or at least didn't.
Design that way.
But this is also why Tiberius stops right as they're one vote away from the majority, to sort of give his former friend an opportunity to bow out before what just appeared inevitable, right? And in episode 3, remember how Tiberius has them doing a survey of the public lands to divide them up?
Yep.
Well, he appointed basically only his friends and relatives to run that survey.
Nepotism.
I mean, he said that it was because they were the only people he could trust, and this is probably true, but you can see how that might look, and this ends up getting used against him later. And on to episode...
I think that's common, though. I mean, in some places. It's not good. It's not good, though. It's common.
4. Here, I mentioned that one of the reforms guys put into place was that equestrians could now be judges. This is actually super important because senators got away with all sorts of stuff because they knew that all the judges they'd ever face would be senators.
Yeah, it's like there's no checks.
So, for example, rather than paying their taxes, there's basically this unspoken agreement that they'd all just bribe the tax collectors, and if any of them ever got caught, because the judge they'd face would be a senator, even if they got convicted, their sentence would be far less than having actually paid their taxes. Which, of course, was something the equestrian class couldn't do. And given that a fair portion of the equestrian class was sort of the up-and-coming entrepreneurial part of Rome, this stung. So Gaius did away with the corruption,
That's great,
undercut
though.
his enemy's power base, and got a whole section of society devoted to him because they figured as soon as somebody got rid of him, they'd go back to not being able to be judges, all sort of with one stroke. And this is an amazing political maneuver, and I mean, probably actually really solid policy. But it also causes one to wonder a little bit which was first and foremost in his mind, right? To me, this almost brings up, was faction at this point already so important that that was more important than the reform itself? But on to episode 5. Remember how Gaius is stabbed to death, where his brother is sort of beaten with parts of an old bench? Well, you might be wondering about that.
Were they outside the Pomerium?
It was illegal to carry swords in the city of Rome, which is why Tiberius gets clubbed with bits of a public park. So how does Gaius get stabbed? Funny, if somewhat morbid story. So get this. He was stabbed to death with pens. Roman scribes would carry around these metal stylus to inscribe notes on wax because it was a lot cheaper than always using ink and parchment. But to be effective for doing this, most of these styli were just kept nice and sharp. So in Rome, when you wanted to shiv someone real good, you got a pen.
Well, you have a lance in him. That's where I was thinking, where is it? If you have a lance in him, either that was smuggled or that's outside the Pomerium.
But all right, I'm still recovering from PAX, so I'm just going to keep our Walpole moment short this time and say that Walpole's son Horace, the Gothic novelist guy, once said, when sort of decrying his lost youth and how he always had this former fire to fight the political fight, but joking about not wanting to tear the country apart any longer with internal strife, famously said, "I am no longer that Gracchus." So with that, I'll leave you. I will see you in a week when we start with the history of paper money, which has all sorts of neat scheming and crazy facts, and a lot of economic heavy lifting as well. But it's going to be great. And in the meantime, as always, please listen to the...
Beautiful. So this is where we'll pause on this frame. First off, apologies for tangenting it a little bit. Even though maybe if you like that, maybe you don't like that. I don't care. I do care what you like, but I don't care about doing that too often. But nevertheless, this video was very, very much a interesting bookend to our series with the Brothers Gracchi. Before this, never heard of them, and most people might have not have heard of them. Like I've told you guys many times, this is like a historical journey through this channel, kind of getting contextual arms up against all the world's history, and kind of like contextualizing it towards a community way, where you guys had context, I'll have opinions, you guys have opinions, videos have opinions, and we kind of just metastasize the opinions together to create a result. So I appreciate you guys watching. This was a fun little series. If you have any interesting extra history series that you definitely know that I should tap into, let me know. The goal is usually with all our channels that we watch is to watch their entire catalog eventually. So trust me, I will get to pretty much every video as long as it's not like wildly copyright protected and or TOS, where they'll have like things that if I show, this channel will not exist. So we don't want that. But nevertheless, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out and bye-bye.